Coming up on Arirang News, the South Korean government's latest report on the economy says the resurgence of COVID-19 could present uncertainties in the economic recovery. The distancing rules now in place in Seoul, it says, could hit demand. Because of the rise in coronavirus cases, the South Korean government is seeking to raise the distancing level outside of the Seoul area, too. President Moon said this weekend will be a critical time in stopping the virus. And South Korea and the U.S. are going to launch a working group on cybersecurity to counter online threats to national security and infrastructure. It's 5 p.m. here in Seoul. Thank you for joining us on Arirang News. I'm Devin Whiting. The South Korean economy continues to recover thanks to strong exports, and there's an ongoing recovery in employment. But the latest Green Book report from the Finance Ministry says there could be uncertainty ahead because of the surge in coronavirus cases. Paeun-ji reports.
The South Korean economy is recovering, but it could be hampered by the resurgence of COVID-19. According to a monthly economic report released by the Finance Ministry on Friday, the government assessed that economic uncertainties could heighten. In June, the country's exports soared by almost 40% on year, led by semiconductors and petroleum products. But production fell as a result of decrease in manufacturing and service production. The ministry expressed concern over domestic demand suffering due to the Greater Seoul area being put under Level 4 social distancing measures, the highest level in the country's 4-tier scheme.
We are seeing a surge in COVID-19 cases again, and the capital region is under tougher social distancing rules. This can have some impact on the face-to-face service sector, even though we have been seeing an improvement in domestic demand until June.
The job market also showed signs of recovery last month, as there were 582,000 more people employed in June compared to the same month the previous year. But the Vice Finance Minister said on Friday that the government is closely monitoring the labor market, as it could get worse again, with employment in the service sector being severely impacted by the pandemic. Paeun-ji, Arirang News.
The United States is likely to see several more months of high inflation, according to Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, who was asked about the situation Thursday by CNBC. She said that while it's important to monitor inflation carefully, fundamentally she expects it will settle down. Her remarks align with those of Fed Chair Jerome Powell. Speaking at a Senate hearing the same day, Powell acknowledged that while the Fed is not comfortable with the inflation rate, he believes it will tail off when economic conditions normalize. The U.S. Senate has unanimously backed a bill prohibiting the import of all goods from China's Xinjiang region because of reports that Muslims in Xinjiang are being subjected to forced labor. China, though, says the U.S. is undermining stability and the global supply chain. Kim Hyo-sun reports.
The U.S. Senate passed a bill Wednesday aimed at banning imports from China's Xinjiang region following allegations of human rights abuses against the local Uyghur Muslim population. The ban will only be waived if importers can provide evidence their products were not made using forced labor. The Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act also requires the Department of Homeland Security to list entities who collaborate with the Chinese government in the repression of ethnic minority groups. The bill, which received unanimous consent, needs to pass the House of Representatives before being sent to President Biden for it to be signed into law. The move is in line with Washington's continued criticism of Beijing over its actions against ethnic groups. China slammed the bill again, denying claims of human rights abuses.
The so-called human rights and forced labor issues in Xinjiang are completely inconsistent with the facts. The U.S. approach has seriously undermined the security and stability of the global industrial chain and supply chain.
Beijing's foreign ministry also warned the U.S. to stop what it called political manipulation, accusing Washington of lying to attack China. Currently, Xinjiang is a global hub for the production of polysilicon, which is used to make solar panels. Therefore, Washington's move could have a big impact on the global solar industry in the years to come. Kim Hyo-sun, Arirang News.
Member states of the World Trade Organization have agreed to speed up talks on banning government subsidies that have led to overfishing, aiming to reach a deal this year. These negotiations have been in progress now for 20 years. At a virtual meeting Thursday, the trade ministers of the 164 member states, including South Korea, reaffirmed their commitment to resolving the issue. The talks have taken so long because of a range of issues, such as whether to give special treatment to developing countries. Time now for an in-depth look at the market news on this Friday, and for that I'm joined on the line by Mr. Daniel Yu, global strategist at Yuanta Securities. Mr. Yu, good afternoon. Thank you for making time today.
Good afternoon.
Well, let's start with the Finance Ministry's latest Green Book report on the economy, which says that the resurgence of the coronavirus in Korea presents uncertainties, or could present uncertainties, for the economy. And that's something that hasn't been in the report since March. Tell us a bit more about the government's outlook.
Yes, as you know, the South Korean economy is on the right track of recovery, but continuously this flare-up of the COVID-19 cases might have some negative implication for the domestic demand. Uncertainty clearly happens as the social distancing has strengthened, and that the economic activity in terms of domestic consumption could weaken in the future. If you look at the amount of the new additional patients, every day it's over 1,000 cases plus, and that's been happening for more than 7-8 days now. And clearly the numbers were rising in a trend, and it did hit about 1,600 plus in a few days ago. But it seems to be now stabilizing, but nevertheless, it is a very strong number. The ministry have said that the export remains robust continuously, but there is an uncertainty regarding the domestic consumption. So far now, domestic demand shows signs of improvement while the job market is recovering from the slump. But with this uncertainty of the COVID-19 cases, the uncertainty about the domestic demand could heighten, as that's what Ministry of Economy and Finance said in its Green Book. Now, in looking at the private consumption area, if you look at the domestic debt level, the retail debt as a percent of GDP is quite high. So therefore, unless the economy is improving, there's a difficulty of boosting the domestic consumption through the additional boosting measures for now. So therefore, we need the activity to improve as the global economy improves and the resurgency dies down. Without that, we think that there's clearly some signals and possibility that domestic demand might be weaker than expected going forward.
Well, now turning to the markets, stocks on Wall Street overnight were down for the most part, with Jerome Powell saying he does see an elevated level of inflation, though he still expects it to come back down. And investors also seem to brush off some better than expected earnings. What's the story today in the global markets?
Right. We needed to see some of the inflation number to stabilize right before these earnings releases. We already knew that the earnings numbers were going to be very strong for the second quarter as the economy heating up or, say, recovering very fast. So most of these earnings releases numbers will be very positive. At that same time, we needed some kind of cooling numbers regarding to the inflations, but we didn't get that. And there's mixed signals in terms of what kind of the inflation will be coming through in the future. If you look at the number, it showed over 5.4% year-on-year growth rate. Yes, it is from the very low base, But nevertheless, if you look at on a month-to-month basis, it is showing a 0.9% growth, which you analyze that number, that's over 10% growth for the year. So clearly there is a signals of the inflation. Of course, though, there's the inflation numbers are related to the used car sales price and some other so-called COVID-19 impact that is affecting the inflations, and that's what the White House is saying, that the actual inflation without these unreasonable these numbers, if you look at just the core inflation numbers, it is already down to 0.22%. That's what the White House is saying. So if that's the case, then inflation number is around about 2 to 3% on average. So with this, we see the bond rate stabilizing and the market is actually stable. We don't see the market crashing down because of the inflation, worrying about the tapering and an interest rate hike. But nevertheless, it's lacking some certainties in regards to inflation for the market to further rise strongly. So for the time being, we might need some time for the market to rise in the future. We probably need to see the July number of inflation before the market to do the summer rally that it's expected.
Right, we'll keep an eye on that, of course, on this program. And today here in Korea, the Kospi closed lower as retail investors continued to buy, but foreigners and institutions were selling. Some biopharmaceutical names like Seoul were off today, but a higher close for Kakao Games. Tell us about the domestic market.
Yes, the domestic market continues to be showing some corrections after a sharp fall last week by about 3.8%. And on Monday and Tuesday did recover nicely, but towards the end of this week, as with these inflation numbers of U.S. comes through, people are uncertain. Also, with this COVID-19 cases heating up, uncertainty regarding the domestic consumption recovery is there, and therefore we are seeing some weakness of the Kospi and Kosdaq. Today, Kospi closed down by 0.28%, and Kosdaq was down by 0.22%. And also, BOK is talking about benchmark policy rate unchanged for the time being, but they're saying that they will probably conduct some interest rate hike before the end of the year. But as you know, as we said, this COVID-19 cases might have some implication for Korea, so therefore we might not see actual rate hike, but nevertheless, the BOK have hinted at that possibilities. All in all, Korea is much more skewed towards the export, and these export numbers are robust despite all this uncertainty about COVID-19 new cases. So therefore, we think that the fundamentals and valuations for Korean equity market remains to be very strong. If you look at dividend yield for Korea and Kospi, you're looking at 4% for this year and continuously for 4% for next year as well. If that's the case, the current government bond rate of 2%, that makes it the Korean equity market very attractive. So for the time being, there are uncertainties, but if you go towards the end of the year, as dividend yield looks attractive, we think the Korean market has more room to rise in the future.
And finally, Mr. Yu, if we could talk about the exchange rate. The won has come back down from 11.50 to the dollar, where it was on Wednesday, Thursday, now to about 11.40. What was behind that move, and where do you see it going?
As I said, the Korean won has probably some possibility that it might rise to 11.50 level, but it might be difficult to further rise in the future because if you look at the domestic economy, it is very strong relative to any other countries. And the overall government debt as a percentage of GDP is also low relative to any other countries. Only uncertainty is the consumer debt. That is quite uncertain as the total percentage is about 100% plus of the GDP. But in any case, there's a possibility that the renminbi, Chinese yuan might have implication for the Korean won. despite the reserve ratio cut by Chinese Bank of China, PBOC, we did not see the Chinese yuan depreciating aggressively. If that happened, then Korean won should have further depreciated. But it seems that the Chinese yuan is stabilizing. With that, we think that the global economy is reasonably good. With the boosting measure coming through from China, as well as U.S. picking up, we think that Korean export remains to be very strong. If that's the case, the currency is not going to be further depreciate from the 1150 level. Right now, it has retreated back down to 1140 territories. We think that Korean won should be range bound anywhere between 1100 to 1150 over the next several months.
All right, Mr. Yu, we'll have to leave it there for today. Thank you, as always, for your insights. We always appreciate it, and have a great weekend.
Thank you. You too.
South Korea continues to report more than 1,500 coronavirus cases a day. Distancing has been strengthened in the capital area, but with cases occurring across the country, tougher measures are likely in store for other regions too. The Prime Minister has asked local governments to ban gatherings of more than 4 people. Yellen has the latest.
South Korea on Friday reported 1,536 new cases. All but 60 were locally transmitted. There was one more death, bringing the death toll to 2,051. Although the number of new cases was slightly lower than the day before, South Korea is still on high alert, with cluster infections popping up both in the capital region and the rest of the country. The country has implemented even stronger measures to try to slow the spread of the virus. The capital region, under level 4, the highest level in the social distancing scheme, will test run a QR code check-in system at department stores until the end of this month. Busan has seen an average of 56 cases a day over the past week, up by about 17 a day from the previous week, causing the city to enforce a complete ban on nightclubs, pubs, and singing rooms from next Monday. And other areas outside the capital region, mostly under level 2, are also considering social gathering restrictions. In a government briefing on Friday morning, the Prime Minister said these regions should limit social gatherings up to 4 people.
We ask regions outside the capital to come together and implement social gathering restrictions of up to 4 people.
He added that if cases continue to rise, these regions should also restrict people from gathering after 6 p.m., as the capital region is doing right now. Further measures could be announced this Sunday. As authorities extend stricter social distancing measures, President Moon Jae-in said in a tweet that this weekend is a critical point in the efforts to contain the virus. He asked everyone to keep showing their efforts by staying home and refraining from social gatherings. Xinjiang, Arirang News.
High school seniors and school staff in South Korea will start getting the Pfizer vaccine from next Monday. Reservations will also start next week for people aged 50 to 54. Choi Min-jung reports.
From next week, South Korea will start administering COVID-19 vaccines to high school seniors and faculty members.
In order to hold college entrance exams safely, COVID-19 vaccines will be administered to around 650,000 high school seniors and faculty members over 2 weeks, starting next Monday.
Inoculations will run until July 30th at vaccination centers, following each school's own vaccination schedule. Also starting Monday are reservations for those aged 53 and 54. The next day on Tuesday, people aged 50 to 52 will be able to book shots. And from Wednesday to Saturday, reservations will be open to all 50 to 54-year-olds. The vaccinations will start from August 16th, and recipients will be getting Moderna's vaccine. According to the government's inoculation program, another 35 million doses are set to arrive in South Korea by the end of August. They include 835,000 AstraZeneca doses through the COVAX facility and a total of 34 million doses of AstraZeneca, Pfizer, and Moderna vaccines acquired directly from the manufacturers. Around 100,000 doses of Janssen shots are also expected to arrive by then. As of Friday morning, nearly 16 million people, or 31.1% of the total population, have received first doses, and 12.3% have been fully vaccinated. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
The South Korean government is sending face masks and rapid COVID-19 test kits to Korean nationals in Myanmar due to the worsening virus situation there. Seoul's foreign ministry says it'll also send 26 oxygen generators, which local Koreans have requested. Those will be sent in batches from Tuesday. Separately, the Korean government will also be sending $1 million worth of quarantine supplies to Indonesia, including oxygen generators, as part of humanitarian efforts in response to the country's surge in infections. South Korea and the United States are going to launch a working group on cybersecurity to protect against online threats to national security and infrastructure. Hong Yoo reports.
To strengthen their bilateral response and cooperation against global cyber threats, the South Korean government will launch a special working group with the U.S. At a high-level interagency meeting on Friday to review the nation's cybersecurity status, the Director of National Security at the Blue House, Seo-hun, along with vice ministerial officials from 16 government offices, made the decision to take preemptive action, having observed ransomware attacks both in the country and overseas. A South Korea-U.S. cyber working group comes as a result of the agreement reached between President Moon Jae-in and U.S. President Joe Biden during their summit in May to enhance cybersecurity cooperation. The government says it will be actively responding to the diverse types of cyber threats as they are directly related to national security. Seo-hun said that the continuous ransomware attacks require meticulous countermeasures from the government, especially as the reliance on information technology has increased due to COVID-19. The participants of the meeting evaluated the performance of major national cybersecurity strategies, such as the establishment of National Cyber Threat Information Sharing System and the development of artificial intelligence-based detection technology. The National Intelligence Service reported that it's going to unify the current cyber alert systems that are being managed separately by the military and the civilian and public sectors. The Ministry of Science and ICT will help small and medium-sized businesses with a secure data vault, as well as with expanded PC security services. And with the threat of advanced defense technology exposure increasing, the Defense Acquisition Program Administration says it will enhance its cybersecurity by carrying out diagnostics on potential cybersecurity vulnerabilities and by implementing the U.S. Defense Cybersecurity Certification System. Seo-hun urged government officials in attendance to form the best security management system possible to guard high-tech defense technologies that are directly related to national security and infrastructure, as any attack could cause great inconvenience to people's lives. Hong Yoo, Arirang News.
U.S. Deputy Secretary of State Wendy Sherman will visit Seoul next week for talks with her South Korean counterpart on bilateral issues, regional issues, and Korean Peninsula affairs. Seoul's foreign ministry says Sherman and Vice Foreign Minister Choi Jong-un will sit down next Friday. 2 days ahead of that meeting, Vice Minister Choi will meet in Tokyo, both with Sherman and their Japanese counterpart. On the sidelines of that three-way meeting, Choi will also hold bilateral talks with his Japanese counterpart, Takeo Mori. Wildfires are burning in the western United States and in some parts of Canada. One fire started in Oregon about a week ago, torching an area larger than New York City and displacing 2,000 residents. As of Thursday, around 7% of the fire had been contained, but it's taking longer than hoped due to the hot and dry weather. According to the National Interagency Fire Center, around 70 wildfires are burning in a dozen states, including California, Idaho, and Montana, and it's issued its highest wildfire alert. In the extreme heat we're having in Korea right now, the health authorities are urging the food delivery industry to be extra careful about food poisoning. The Food Safety Ministry warned today that food can go off more easily in this hot and humid weather, and so food needs to be cooked thoroughly and refrigerated when appropriate, and that soups and stews should be boiled again right before eating. Restaurants with a high volume of delivery business should be extra careful to get food out the door as soon as possible when it's ready. More than 100 people got food poisoning recently from the packed lunches they had delivered at a construction site in Chungcheongnam-do province. And that brings us to the end of this newscast. Thank you for watching. More live news coming your way at 7 p.m. Korea time.